Forbidden history. What if the serpent in Eden was never just a talking snake? What if the image you learned in childhood, Eve standing by a tree, a harmless reptile whispering temptation, was a veil, a simplification hiding something terrifying, something cosmic? What if that serpent was not merely Satan in disguise, but a being older, more complex, more deeply woven into the fabric of human origins than anyone dares admit? Why does Genesis call him nahash, a Hebrew word that can mean serpent, shining one, diviner, bringer of knowledge? Why does later tradition fuse him with Satan, while ancient Jewish writings portray him as something closer to a watcher, a being of light turned corrupter of flesh? And what if the fall of man was not simply about fruit, but about an encounter with a forbidden intelligence, one that altered human destiny, body and soul? Close your eyes and picture Eden not as a garden of simple trees, but as a temple, a mountain of God, with rivers flowing from its heart, a place where heaven and earth met. Adam and Eve were not mere gardeners. They were priests of creation, charged to guard, shamar, and serve, aved, the sacred space. The serpent enters not as a reptile slithering in grass, but as a radiant being, one of the shining ones, perhaps of the order later called cherubim or seraphim, beings associated with fire and serpent imagery. The text hints at this, but tradition buried it. Why? Perhaps because the truth is too dangerous, too close to myths whispered in other cultures. Think of the Sumerians, who told of Enki, the trickster god of wisdom, who gave forbidden knowledge to humans. Think of the Greeks, who spoke of Prometheus, stealing fire from the gods to empower mankind, punished for his transgression. Think of the Hindus, where the Naga, serpents of wisdom, guard treasure and knowledge, sometimes blessing, sometimes cursing. Everywhere across myth, the serpent is not just evil, it is knowledge, light, a boundary crossed. Genesis seems to join that chorus, but with a twist. This knowledge was not enlightenment, but corruption. What if the serpent was a being offering premature power, a shortcut to divinity, at the cost of death? Archaeology whispers of this serpent cult. In ancient sites from Mesopotamia to Mesoamerica, serpents coil in stone carvings, guardians of thresholds. At Göbekli Tepe, the oldest temple, serpent motifs dominate, etched in limestone pillars, their bodies winding like rivers of wisdom and poison. In Egypt, the uraeus serpent crowned the pharaoh, symbol of divine authority and protection. In Mesoamerica, Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, was revered as giver of knowledge, law, and agriculture. Do these echo Eden's serpent, an ancient archetype of a being who grants power at the price of innocence? Could the serpent in Genesis be the same figure remembered by civilizations oceans apart? Even science hints at a serpent in your blood. Geneticists speak of mitochondrial Eve, the mother of us all, and Y-chromosomal Adam. Our DNA carries the scars of ancient intermingling, with Neanderthals, Denisovans, and ghost populations we cannot name. The serpent's temptation promised a new kind of humanity. You shall be like gods, knowing good and evil. Is it possible that this promise was more than metaphor? That something entered our very blood, altering the trajectory of humanity forever? Forbidden knowledge not just in mind, but in flesh? If so, then the serpent's voice is not just ancient. It still murmurs in your cells. Theology struggles to contain this. Later writings equate the serpent with Satan, but Genesis never says so directly. Instead, the serpent is crafty, subtle, wise. In Hebrew, arum, a word that plays on the nakedness, arumim, of Adam and Eve. The text is not accidental. It tells you the serpent's wisdom exposed their vulnerability. The serpent is not a cartoon villain. He is a being of intellect, of dazzling brilliance, of subtle deception. The Book of Enoch describes watchers descending, teaching forbidden arts, corrupting humanity. Could the Serpent of Eden be the first of them? The prototype of angelic rebellion that would culminate in Genesis 6. If so, then Eden was not just the fall of man, it was the first mingling of forbidden intelligence into human destiny. Now pause and imagine. If you had been there, standing in the garden, what would you have seen? Not a snake on a branch, but a radiant figure, a shimmering presence, speaking words that rang with power. You will not surely die. Would you have resisted? Or would you, like Eve, have reached, drawn not only by fruit but by the promise of becoming more, of becoming like God? And if this being was more than Satan, more than a serpent, then who, or what, was he really? The story isn't over. What if the Serpent of Eden was not merely the devil in disguise, but the first emissary of a rebellion that spans heaven and earth? An ancient intelligence that still seeks to mingle with humanity, whispering in myths, encoded in DNA, preparing even now for its return. Forbidden history. The Serpent in Eden. Was he Satan, as we were taught, or something stranger? The Bible itself never names him as the devil. That connection comes later, in Revelation. That ancient serpent, who is called the devil and Satan. But Genesis only calls him nahash. In Hebrew, this word means serpent, yes, but it also carries the sense of one who shines, one who divines, one who whispers secrets. So ask yourself, if the text wished to describe a snake, why use a word with such shimmering ambiguity? Could it be because the author preserved a truth too dangerous to spell out plainly? Imagine this being not crawling in dust but standing upright, radiant, speaking with intelligence. Early Jewish traditions hint at it. The Midrash says the serpent was once a majestic creature who walked on two legs before being cursed to crawl. Some Gnostic texts describe him as a revealer, a being of light who opened humanity's eyes. The Book of Enoch tells of angels descending, teaching forbidden knowledge, sorcery, metallurgy, enchantments. Do you see the thread? The serpent is not simply evil. He is a giver of knowledge, a corrupter by illumination, a teacher whose wisdom destroys. Mythology confirms this archetype. In Mesopotamia, the god Enki, Lord of Wisdom, tricks heaven to give humanity forbidden gifts: water, knowledge, survival. In Greece, Prometheus steals fire from Olympus, gifting mankind progress, punished eternally for his theft. In India, Nagas guard treasures and sacred lore, half-divine serpents that can bless or ruin. In Mesoamerica, Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, brings agriculture and calendars, but also carries the duality of creator and trickster. All these myths share a figure: serpent, trickster, bringer of knowledge, violator of divine boundaries. Different names, same memory. Could Genesis be preserving not only the first sin, but the first encounter with this archetype? Archaeology adds its voice. At Göbekli Tepe, serpent motifs dominate the carvings. Scholars puzzle why the builders exalted the serpent so persistently. At Çatalhöyük, clay figurines of snakes coil beside mother goddess statues, symbols of power and fertility. In Egypt, the uraeus serpent crowns the pharaoh's head, the sign of divine sovereignty. In the Levant, Bronze Age amulets show snakes intertwined with tree symbols, echoes of Eden carved into stone. Why do civilizations separated by oceans all exalt the serpent as a mediator of knowledge, life, and power? Because they are remembering the same presence, the same whisper that once spoke in Eden. Even science cannot erase the serpent's shadow. Our DNA bears evidence of sudden leaps, cognitive revolutions, symbolic thinking, art, music. Anthropologists wonder, why did humanity's brains suddenly awaken? Why did language and myth appear almost overnight? Could this be the fruit of forbidden knowledge? The serpent promised, "You will be like gods, knowing good and evil." And something happened in that moment. Something encoded itself in us. Knowledge was gained, but innocence lost. Science calls it evolution. Genesis calls it the fall. What if both are true, and the serpent was the catalyst? And theology, this is where the serpent's role becomes unbearable. If the serpent is Satan, then Eden was simply a test. But if the serpent is more, a watcher, a shining being, part of a rebellion older than humanity, then Eden was the opening of a cosmic war. Humanity became the battleground, our very flesh, the contested ground of heaven and earth. The curse on the serpent, "Your seed and her seed shall be at enmity," is not just about reptiles. It is about two bloodlines, two destinies, the serpent's seed and the woman's seed, locked in conflict until Christ, the last Adam, crushed the serpent's head at the cross. But Revelation warns, the serpent still coils, waiting for its final strike. Now imagine yourself in Eden. The serpent approaches, not crawling but radiant, speaking words that stir your soul. He offers not fruit, but transformation, not rebellion, but divinity. Would you see through the lie? Or would you, like Eve, be drawn by the promise of wisdom? And if this being is more than Satan, if he is the first of the Watchers, then perhaps Eden's serpent was not just tempter, but teacher, altering humanity forever. The story isn't over. What if the serpent's whisper did not end in Eden, but echoes still, in myths, in ruins, in your very blood? And what if his promise of forbidden knowledge is rising again, in our age preparing the way for a new fall? Forbidden history. What if the serpent's true legacy was not the fruit, not even the fall, but the seed? Genesis records a curse spoken not just to the woman or to Adam, but to the serpent himself. "I will put enmity between you and the woman, between your seed and her seed." A cryptic phrase. If the serpent were only a reptile or only a symbol of Satan, why speak of his seed? Why does Scripture hint at a bloodline, a lineage, something biological? Could this be the hidden root of the Nephilim story, the unspoken beginning of hybrid humanity? Consider this. After Eden, Cain is born, and his story is immediately drenched in violence. Early Jewish traditions, controversial but persistent, whisper that Cain was of the evil one, not merely Adam's son but somehow tainted by the serpent. Some Gnostic texts go further, painting Cain as the literal offspring of a union between Eve and the serpent being, a mingling of human and forbidden essence. Shocking, blasphemous perhaps, but why did such traditions endure? Because they sensed that seed meant more than metaphor. If so, Cain's city was not only the first civilization, it was the serpent's seed building its dominion on earth. Archaeology reveals the serpent's mark across Canaanite lands. In Mesopotamia, serpent gods and dragon motifs dominate, from Ningishzida to Tiamat. In Canaan, serpent idols were unearthed in shrines, coiled around trees, just as in Eden. In Egypt, the cobra adorned Pharaoh's crown, symbol of divine power. In Mesoamerica, the feathered serpent ruled as deity and lawgiver. Is this coincidence, or evidence of the serpent's cult? Cain's seed exalting the being who first offered forbidden knowledge. Even Israel itself, in rebellion, raised the bronze serpent in the wilderness, a symbol of healing that later became idolatry. The serpent was everywhere, hiding in plain sight. Mythology amplifies the warning. In Greece, Python, the serpent of Delphi, guarded oracles until slain by Apollo. In Hindu lore, Vasuki, the serpent king, churned the cosmic ocean, releasing nectar of immortality, but also poison. In Norse tales, Jormungandr, the world serpent, coils around the earth, destined to rise at Ragnarok. These are not random. They are fragments of a single memory. The serpent is never just a snake, but a cosmic being, entwined with knowledge, destiny, destruction. Science may be more entangled than it dares admit. Our DNA is littered with viral insertions, genetic sequences that do not originate with us, but from foreign intrusions long ago. Geneticists puzzle over these, some calling them ancient infections. But what if they are not infections but echoes? What if the serpent's seed is not myth, but the memory of hybridization, a forbidden mingling of blood that altered humanity forever? We speak of Neanderthals and Denisovans, but geneticists also whisper of ghost lineages, unknown ancestors written in our blood. Could these be the serpent's shadow in your genome? Theology does not shy away. Christ's mission is described as crushing the serpent's head. Revelation calls Satan the ancient serpent, but also speaks of his offspring, his followers, his kingdom. Jesus calls the Pharisees sons of the devil. John writes of the children of God and the children of the evil one. This is not metaphorical language alone. It is the continuation of the Eden curse, the war of seeds. If Christ is the seed of the woman, then his very existence is the answer to the serpent's bloodline. Now pause. Imagine if the serpent's appearance in Eden was not merely a moment of temptation, but the planting of a rival civilization, a bloodline meant to war against humanity until the end of time. Imagine if every empire that worshipped serpent gods, every myth of hybrid kings, every shadow in your DNA is the serpent's seed whispering still. Does that make Eden less a garden story and more the opening chapter of a cosmic blood war? The story isn't over. What if the serpent's seed is not buried in myth but alive, hidden in your world, waiting to rise again? And what if the true battle of history is not between nations, but between two seeds born in Eden? Forbidden history. The serpent in Eden was cursed, yet the curse itself hides a mystery. On your belly you shall go, and dust you shall eat all the days of your life. If the serpent was merely a snake, does this not sound strange? Why curse a reptile to crawl when snakes already slither? Ancient interpreters noticed this. The Midrash says the serpent once walked upright, radiant like a man, until stripped of its glory. Some church fathers hinted that the curse was symbolic, that the being behind the serpent was cast down, reduced, humiliated. Could it be that the eating of dust was not zoology, but theology? A divine stripping away of cosmic stature, binding a rebellious being to the realm of mortality? Think of Isaiah 14 and Ezekiel 28, where kings are described as radiant beings fallen from heaven, walking in Eden, the garden of God, adorned with jewels, yet cast down to the dust. Are these only metaphors for kings of Babylon and Tyre? Or are they shadows of the serpent's true identity, fragments of a story too dangerous to tell plainly? If so, then the serpent was not alone. He was part of a rebellion, one that reached from Eden to Babel, from the Watchers of Hermon to the beasts of Revelation. Archaeology whispers the same curse. Across the ancient world, serpent images are tied not only to wisdom, but to humiliation, destruction, death. At Ugarit, the serpent Lotan is slain by Baal. In Mesopotamia, Tiamat, the great dragon serpent of chaos, is cut down by Marduk. In Egypt, Apophis, the serpent of darkness, is eternally defeated by Ra each night. In Norse myth, Thor crushes Jörmungandr even as he falls himself. Always the serpent rises, always the serpent falls. Could these myths echo the same truth? That a radiant being became the crawling enemy of creation, forever bound to dust, yet never fully destroyed? Science, too, leaves traces. Serpents in biology are not simply predators. They are liminal creatures, silent, hidden, feared, revered. In evolutionary terms, they are survivors, enduring extinction events that erased mightier beasts. Is this a parable written in nature itself? That the serpent, cursed but enduring, mirrors a cosmic truth? That the being of Eden was diminished, bound to the realm of mortality, yet somehow still survives, slithering in shadow, waiting for moments to strike again. Theology sharpens the edge. In Revelation, The serpent reappears not as a crawling snake, but as a dragon, vast and cosmic, warring against heaven. The curse in Genesis was not annihilation, but reduction, humiliation in one age, resurgence in another. The serpent's dust-eating may symbolize feeding on mortality, thriving on human corruption, living wherever man's flesh decays. That is why Christ's resurrection is the serpent's ultimate defeat. Not only triumph over sin, but triumph over decay, dust itself transformed into glory. Pause for a moment. If the serpent was a radiant being, stripped of his stature, crawling in humiliation, yet still whispering in myths and DNA, then Eden was not his end. It was his beginning. What if his curse is his camouflage? What if his crawling through dust is what keeps him hidden, working unseen, worshipped in temples, whispered of in myths, remembered in ruins? The story isn't over. What if the serpent's curse was never meant to erase him, but to bind him to earth until the final judgment, so that even now, in every empire, in every deception, his coils still tighten around humanity, unseen yet inescapable, waiting for the day he rises as the dragon once more? Forbidden history. The serpent's voice in Eden has never gone silent. It echoes in every culture, every myth, every forbidden teaching that whispers of hidden knowledge. Genesis tells us he promised Eve, "You shall not surely die. Your eyes shall be opened, and you shall be like gods." This was not only temptation, it was initiation, a covenant of rebellion sealed in words. And the consequences were not confined to Eden. That same voice resurfaces in every tale of humans taught by divine rebels, every myth where knowledge comes at a price. Could it be that the serpent is the thread connecting Eden to Babel, Eden to Hermon, Eden to every site of forbidden wisdom on earth? Look to the Sumerians. Their myths speak of the Anunnaki, gods who descended and taught men arts and sciences. One of their names? Ningish-Zida, the lord of the serpent tree, depicted as a serpent coiled around a staff, eerily similar to the biblical tree and serpent entwined. In Egypt, Thoth, often associated with the ibis or serpent, gave writing, calculation, astronomy. In Mesoamerica, Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, was the lawgiver, teacher of calendars, bringer of corn. In Greece, Hermes, whose caduceus bears twin serpents entwined around a rod, was messenger and trickster, guide of souls. How many times must the same pattern repeat before we admit that cultures oceans apart were all remembering the same primordial deceiver, the same being who first whispered in Eden? Archaeology strengthens the suspicion. Göbekli Tepe, the world's first known temple, is covered in serpent carvings, some intertwined with human figures, others looming like guardians of gateways. In the Indus Valley, amulets show serpents beside sacred trees. In Israel, long after Eden, Hezekiah destroyed the bronze serpent Moses had lifted in the wilderness because it had become an idol, worshipped as Nehushtan. Why does the serpent persist as an object of awe and worship, even among God's chosen? Because the serpent was more than a reptile. He was a presence humanity could not forget. Science murmurs its own version of this story. Anthropologists note humanity's sudden cognitive revolution 40,000 years ago. Art, music, symbolic thought appearing almost overnight. The serpent's promise was knowledge, awareness. Could this be the very moment our ancestors had their eyes opened? Neurologists point to the amygdala, the brain's center of fear and awareness, as the part most sensitive to serpent shapes. Humans worldwide, across ages, fear snakes instinctively. Why? Is this evolutionary coincidence, or ancestral memory of a being that once altered our destiny forever? Theology deepens the dread. The serpent is not just a trickster, but a corrupter. Jesus calls him a liar from the beginning. The Book of Enoch expands his legacy. The Watchers taught sorcery, metallurgy, enchantments. They did what the serpent did in Eden, opened eyes, but to destruction. Revelation names him the great dragon who deceives the whole world. Paul warns that, just as the serpent deceived Eve, your minds may be led astray. This is not past tense. The serpent still speaks, not from trees but from ideologies, from philosophies that promise progress without God, enlightenment without obedience. Now pause. Imagine you hear a voice, not outside but within, whispering, "Why obey? Why not taste? Why not become more?" Would you recognize it as the same whisper Eve heard? Would you know that the ancient serpent is not gone, only disguised, speaking through systems, myths, even science? If Eden was the first whisper, then every myth of forbidden knowledge is its echo. And if every civilization built temples to serpents, perhaps the serpent never left at all. The story isn't over. What if the serpent's whisper has only grown louder through history, weaving itself into every religion, every ideology, every experiment that promises godhood? And what if the ultimate fulfillment of his promise is about to appear again in our age, when mankind dares to remake itself in the image of gods? Forbidden history. The serpent's promise in Eden was not just a lie, it was a blueprint. You will be like gods. That sentence has haunted humanity ever since. Every empire, every cult, every ideology that sought to elevate man beyond his limits was echoing the serpent's first offer. And perhaps, just perhaps, every attempt at transhuman power, from ancient sorcery to modern genetic engineering, is part of that same temptation. What if Eden was the first transgression in a long chain, one that began with fruit and ends with rewriting the very code of life? Think of Babel. Humanity united to build a tower that would reach heaven, to make a name for themselves, to ascend without permission. This was the serpent's whisper made into architecture. God scattered them, but the impulse never died. Egypt's pyramids rose as stairways to heaven. Mesopotamian ziggurats stood as cosmic mountains. In every age, Cain's children have built monuments to grasp divinity. And who do these towers honor? Often serpents, dragons, radiant gods. Babel is Eden's serpent given stone and brick. Look at the Watchers in the Book of Enoch. They descended on Mount Hermon, teaching humanity forbidden knowledge, charms, astrology, metallurgy. Their act was Eden amplified, serpents multiplied. They gave what was not theirs to give, accelerating human knowledge without divine permission. And what was the result? The Nephilim, hybrids, giants, beings of renown, but also corruption, violence, and destruction. Isn't that the serpent's promise fulfilled in flesh? Knowledge turned into monstrosity. The fruit of the serpent's whisper written into human blood. Archaeology carries the scars of this. At Baalbek, stones weighing hundreds of tons lie as if placed by giants. At Puma Punku, precision cuts in granite baffle engineers. Myths of hybrid kings echo in every region. Gilgamesh, 2/3 god and 1/3 man. Hercules, son of Zeus. The demigods of every pantheon. Could these all be memories of the serpent's promise incarnated in human history? Civilizations ruled by those who took the serpent's offer too far? And if so, was Eden not just the beginning of sin, but the opening of a forbidden project, a mingling of human and divine never meant to be? Science, unknowingly, circles the same mystery. Geneticists admit, our DNA is not pure. It carries fragments of Neanderthal, Denisovan, and others we cannot name. They call them ghost populations, but Genesis might call them the serpent's children, the fruit of forbidden unions. And now humanity dares to edit its genome again. CRISPR, synthetic embryos, AI merging with biology. Do you see the cycle? Eden begins with forbidden fruit. Today, the serpent whispers again, you can be more. Rewrite your flesh. Upload your mind. Become gods. What if the serpent's voice is not in the past but in our laboratories? Theology ties the threads together. The serpent's offer is always counterfeit godhood. Christ, the true Son, was exalted by obedience, not rebellion. He became like us so we could become like him. Through grace, not theft. The serpent twists that truth, offering shortcuts. Every false messiah, every utopia, every empire promising salvation without God is the serpent's gospel. Revelation shows his endgame. The dragon gives authority to the beast, humanity worships power, and the world receives a counterfeit mark, a false image of godhood. Eden's promise completed, but inverted, corrupted. Now imagine standing in Eden again, but instead of fruit, the serpent offers you a vial of gene-editing serum, or a neural implant, or an AI body promising immortality. Would you see it for what it is? The same lie in a new form? Or would you, like Eve, be drawn by the shimmer of godhood? The serpent has always adapted, always disguised his whisper in the language of progress. The only thing that never changes is the cost. The story isn't over. What if the serpent's final gift is not fruit on a tree, but technology in your hand, offering you the same choice as Eden, to obey and live, or to grasp and fall? And what if humanity, once again, is reaching out its hand? Forbidden history. The serpent's shadow is not confined to Eden, nor to the myths of ancient peoples. It coils itself through history, reappearing in symbols, in cults, in whispers of secret knowledge. Some scholars dismiss these as coincidences, as the universal human fear of reptiles. But the pattern is too precise, too insistent. Why do temples, scriptures, and myths across continents, built by civilizations that never met, speak of the serpent as both enemy and teacher, destroyer and enlightener? Because they are fragments of a single memory, a cosmic truth too vast to be contained in one culture alone. In Egypt, the serpent Apophis was the eternal enemy of Ra, embodiment of chaos, ever seeking to devour the sun. Yet at the same time, the uraeus serpent adorned the pharaoh's brow as a mark of divine kingship. How can the same creature be both enemy and crown? In Mesopotamia, Tiamat, the great chaos serpent, was slain by Marduk to form the world. But Ningishzida, the serpent god, was guardian of life and fertility. In India, the Naga are revered as protectors of treasures and temples, but also feared as bringers of flood and destruction. In Mesoamerica, Quetzalcoatl is both savior and deceiver. Why does the serpent always occupy this double role? Because he is not merely a symbol, he is a being, remembered through different eyes, appearing at once radiant and ruinous. Archaeology confirms that humanity not only feared, but worshipped the serpent. Excavations at Teotihuacan reveal the temple of the feathered serpent, lined with hundreds of serpent heads, each crowned with plumes of divinity. At Göbekli Tepe, serpent carvings dominate, their bodies etched like rivers flowing across the stone pillars, entwining with human figures. In Canaan, serpent idols have been unearthed, their bodies coiled around sacred trees. And at Hazor, a Canaanite city destroyed by Israel, archaeologists discovered a bronze serpent idol hidden in a temple. Perhaps an echo of Eden, perhaps proof that the serpent cult endured even as Israel was called to resist it. Science itself cannot escape the serpent's signature. Neurologists tell us that human brains possess a deep, primal fear of snakes, hardwired into the amygdala. Infants, as young as 6 months, respond with heightened attention to serpent shapes. Evolutionary biologists explain this as survival instinct. But what if it is more? What if humanity remembers? What if deep in your nervous system, there is a memory older than culture, older than writing, a memory of a shining being who once spoke to your ancestors, offering forbidden knowledge and sealing their fate? Theology confronts the serpent most directly. Genesis calls him subtle, not monstrous. Enoch shows us his continuation. The Watchers, teaching sorcery, charms, and violence. Revelation names him the great dragon who deceives the nations. The serpent begins as deceiver, ends as dragon. The scale increases, but the strategy is the same. He offers knowledge without obedience, power without covenant, godhood without God. And every time humanity listens, pause and ask yourself, why is the serpent everywhere? Why is he exalted in crowns and temples, feared in myths, remembered in blood? If he were merely a snake, would humanity's greatest civilizations have built their gods in his image? Or is it possible that they were not imagining but remembering, a being they once encountered, a being who has never truly gone away? The story isn't over. What if the serpent's double nature, crown and curse, wisdom and ruin, means that humanity has never stopped following him? And what if his greatest deception is still ahead? A moment when he will no longer whisper in shadows, but stand revealed as the radiant being of Eden, demanding worship once more? Forbidden history. The serpent story is not only about deception in the garden, not only about myths of civilizations long gone. It is about blood. For Genesis itself speaks of a war of seed. I will put enmity between your seed and her seed. This is no poetic flourish. It is the hidden framework of history, the battlefield that runs beneath nations, religions, and even your very body. If the serpent was only Satan in disguise, then why speak of seed? If the serpent was merely symbolic, why imply lineage, bloodlines, generations? Unless the serpent's encounter with humanity was more intimate, more genetic, than we have been allowed to believe. Look closer at Genesis. After the fall, Eve conceives Cain. Some traditions whisper that Cain was not simply Adam's son. The Book of Jubilees hints at strange unions. Gnostic writings go further, declaring Cain the offspring of the serpent. Shocking? Blasphemous? Perhaps. But notice, Cain is marked, restless, violent. He builds a city when only a handful of people exist. His descendants advance civilization, music, metallurgy, agriculture, but in rebellion, not worship. Could Cain's line be the serpent's seed, not merely in spirit but in flesh? A rival bloodline, advancing knowledge at the price of covenant? Archaeology seems to remember them. The oldest cities, Eridu, Uruk, Nineveh, are drenched in serpent worship. Temples to Ningish Zida, the serpent god, guarded by dragons and entwined with tree imagery, stand at civilization's dawn. In Canaan, serpent idols were buried beneath thresholds, as if marking households of the serpent's children. In Egypt, pharaohs' crowns bore serpents as symbols of divine kingship, their bloodlines claiming descent from gods, not men. If Cain's descendants built cities, could these ruins be their legacy? And if so, was the serpent not merely tempter, but progenitor of a rival humanity? Mythology remembers too. The Greeks tell of Typhon, the monstrous serpent progenitor of giants. His children were hybrid horrors that warred against the Olympians. The Hindus tell of Asuras and Nagas, born of divine rebellion, battling endlessly against the Devas. The Sumerians spoke of demigods, part human, part divine, ruling early kingships. These tales echo a single theme: hybrid bloodlines born of serpent power, rivaling the gods, opposing mankind, yet never fully erased. Science whispers its complicity. Your DNA is not pure. It carries Neanderthal fragments, Denisovan sequences, and even ghost populations that no fossil record can explain. Geneticists admit there are traces of unknown ancestors in your blood, intermingled long ago. What if these ghost lineages are the serpent's legacy? What if the forbidden union of Genesis 6, the sons of God taking daughters of men, was only the continuation of the serpent's intrusion begun in Eden? And what if your blood itself is the battlefield, carrying both the covenant of Seth and the corruption of Cain? Theology holds the key. Christ is called the seed of the woman, not simply the Son of Man. Why such a strange phrase? Because it is the answer to Eden's curse. The serpent's seed wages war across generations, but the woman's seed would rise, crushing the serpent's head. Christ is not only Redeemer, he is genetic fulfillment, the antidote to corruption, the restoration of humanity's true image. That is why the serpent sought to corrupt bloodlines, from Cain to Nephilim to empires worshipping dragon kings. That is why Revelation shows the dragon pursuing the woman who bears the child. The war of seed is the true war of history. Now ask yourself, if the serpent planted a seed in Eden, has it ever left? Could the empires of today, obsessed with power, progress, forbidden knowledge, be the latest flowering of that seed? And if science now dares to rewrite DNA, is it not answering once again the serpent's whisper, "You shall be like gods"? If so, then the war of seed is not myth. It is alive, unfolding in your lifetime. The story isn't over. What if the serpent's seed is not merely a symbol of evil, but a living bloodline, coiling through history, remembered in myth, etched in ruins, hidden in DNA? And what if its final unveiling is yet to come, when serpent and seed collide one last time? Forbidden history. The serpent in Eden may not have been defeated at all. The curse cast him down, but did not silence him. Instead, he slithered into the bloodstream of civilizations, hiding behind crowns, temples, and philosophies. His seed grew with every empire that exalted itself above God. And if you trace the thread carefully, you see him not as myth, not as metaphor, but as the architect behind humanity's darkest leaps. Was it truly man who invented sorcery, astrology, metallurgy? Or was it the serpent's voice, whispering forbidden formulas into human ears? Consider Babylon. Its ziggurat, the Tower of Babel, was not just a monument of stone. It was a cosmic challenge, humanity reaching upward, repeating the serpent's promise. You shall be like gods. The gods of Babylon were dragons and serpents. Marduk fought Tiamat, but bore her serpent power as his inheritance. Babylon's kings called themselves divine, serpent-crowned, serpent-throned. And when Revelation describes the last great empire as Babylon the Great, mother of abominations, is it not telling us that the serpent city never died, only changed its mask? Egypt too bore his mark. The pharaoh's crown was coiled with the uraeus serpent, symbol of divine sovereignty. Their myths praised Apophis, the serpent of chaos, even as they feared him. Their temples were carved with snakes entwined around staffs, symbols of immortality, healing, power. Were these merely animals, or echoes of the radiant being Eve once met in Eden? And if Moses raised a bronze serpent in the wilderness to heal, why did Israel later turn it into an idol, worshipping the very image they were meant to resist? The serpent's charisma has always been irresistible. Mythology from every corner agrees. In China, dragons, serpents of heaven, confer power and authority. In Mesoamerica, Quetzalcoatl is the lawgiver, the civilizer, the bringer of corn. In Greece, Python guarded the oracle of Delphi until Apollo slew him, taking his wisdom for himself. In India, the Naga slumber beneath rivers, guarding treasure and lore. Always serpents, always wisdom, always danger. Is this coincidence, or the same being, remembered through fractured cultural lenses, worshipped by some, feared by others, but never forgotten? Even science may be walking the serpent's path once again. We speak of neural networks, artificial intelligence, genetic manipulation. The serpent's promise was, "Your eyes will be opened." Today we boast of opening the book of life, editing genes, peering into quantum secrets. We call it progress. But is it enlightenment, or the same ancient seduction, the same shortcut to divinity, with the same price? If the serpent planted forbidden knowledge once, What stops him from whispering now in the language of algorithms and code? Theology cuts deepest. Revelation does not describe the serpent as vanquished until the very end. Instead, he grows. Serpent, then dragon, then deceiver of nations. The war of seeds has never ended. Christ crushed his head at the cross, but the coils still writhe, awaiting their final severing. That is why John writes that the whole world lies in the power of the evil one. That is why Paul warns that Satan disguises himself as an angel of light. Because the serpent has never stopped shimmering. He never stopped offering wisdom, and humanity never stopped reaching for it. Now imagine this. What if the serpent has been preparing not just empires but a finale? What if all the serpent gods of the past, all the dragon myths, all the genetic whispers in your blood, are leading to one moment, when humanity once again accepts his offer, not as myth, but as destiny? What if the final civilization is Cain's city reborn, Babylon rebuilt, serpent enthroned? The story isn't over. What if the serpent who whispered in Eden is rising again, not as snake or dragon, but as a radiant savior promising light? And what if the choice Adam and Eve faced is about to be yours? Forbidden history. From the first whisper in Eden until the last trumpet in Revelation, the serpent has never been absent. He is the thread that binds myths to ruins, bloodlines to empires, science to temptation. We were taught that Eden was a story of disobedience, a fruit plucked in innocence. But what if Eden was the opening salvo of a cosmic war? What if the serpent was not only a tempter, but an invader, an intelligence that sought to rewrite humanity itself, to seed his own offspring into the story of creation? Look back. Cain rises from Eve's womb, restless, violent, building a city when only a handful of people exist. The line of Seth calls on the name of the Lord, while the line of Cain advances knowledge, tools, art, power. Genesis 6 tells of sons of God mingling with daughters of men, producing giants. These are not separate stories. They are chapters of the same saga. The serpent's seed warring against the woman's seed, corruption against covenant, hybrid humanity against holy remnant. From Babel to Babylon, Egypt to Rome, every empire that exalted serpent crowns and dragon thrones was not an accident. It was the serpent's plan unfolding, civilization by civilization. And yet, at every step, God preserved his seed. Noah carried it through the flood, Abraham through covenant, Israel through exile, Christ through the cross. This is why the serpent rages. Revelation says the dragon pursued the woman and her child, because the war of seeds was never metaphor. It was blood against blood, seed against seed, history itself a battlefield. And now, in our time, the serpent's whisper returns not in temples, but in technology. Genetic editing, artificial intelligence, the dream of immortality. Are these not the fruit of the same promise? You shall be like gods? Once again, humanity stands in Eden, hand outstretched. Archaeology leaves us ruins of serpent worship. Myth leaves us stories of serpent gods. Science leaves us ghost lineages in DNA. Theology leaves us warnings of a dragon who deceives the nations. Together they form a chorus. The serpent never left. He has been crawling through history, coiling tighter with every age, preparing for his revelation. When Revelation says the world will marvel at the beast, saying, "Who is like him, and who can wage war against him?" Is this not the serpent's final disguise? A savior cloaked in radiance, offering wisdom and power once more? Now imagine yourself, not in ancient Eden, but in the present moment. The serpent stands before you, not as a snake, but as a figure of light, a liberator, a god. He speaks the same words. Why obey? Why submit? You can be more. You can be free. You can be like gods. The fruit is no longer on a tree. It is in your hands, screens, codes, pills, injections. Do you see the pattern? Eden is repeating, but on a global scale. The War of Seeds is reaching its climax. And so we return to the question, was the serpent in Eden just Satan, or something more? The Bible calls him Nahash, Shining One, Deceiver, Seed-bearer. Myths remember him as Prometheus, Quetzalcoatl, Naga, Dragon. Science remembers him as ghost genes, hybrid ancestors. Archaeology remembers him in stone. Theology remembers him as the dragon, the great deceiver. The serpent is all of these, and yet he is not finished. The story isn't over. What if the serpent's final revelation is still ahead? When he sheds every disguise, not as snake, not as myth, but as savior of mankind. What if his promise of godhood is about to be fulfilled, and humanity must choose once again between covenant and corruption, between the city of God and the city of the serpent?